The Indo-Hyas is one of the first ancestors for all mammals living around 55 million years ago. There is an enormous number of animals from all over the world that have the Indo-Hyas as a common ancestor, from animals like domesticated cats and dogs to mice and raccoons, hippos and giraffes, and to, of course, whales. The animal's appearance appears to be a mixture of a mouse and a deer, and it primarily had a herbivorous diet and spent a lot of its time at the bottom of smaller bodies of water like ponds and rivers, like current-day hippos. The Indo-Hyas actually does have a lot of similarities to the hippo, both behavioral and biologically. They spent the vast majority of their time in water and had a very high bone density in order to stay at the bottom of these waters. The Indo-Hyas fed on plants outside the water, even though most of their time was spent in the water. It's no secret that the Indo-Hyas does not have many similarities to the killer whale, other than traits that all or most mammals have. But the one trait that these animals share with the killer whale, that they don't share with any other mammal except for whales, is an ear bone called the auditory bulla, which aids in hearing underwater. Even though these animals' exterior does not look like that of a killer whale, you can find some similarities when you examine the fossil records of these two animals and start to understand how a smaller land herbivore evolved over time into one of the largest apex predators of the ocean. The Ambulocetus, living several million years later than the Indo-Hyas, around 47 million years ago, looks a lot more like the killer whale than the Indo-Hyas, although there is still certainly a long way to go. Unlike the Indo-Hyas, the Ambulocetus had webbed feet rather than hooved feet, which is an evolutionary trait that is moving toward fins over time. And the Ambulocetus was a carnivorous mammal, primarily feeding on fish and other small animals that lived in its habitat, similar to the killer whale. The Ambulocetus is also stepping closer towards the size of a killer whale, from the smaller house cat size of the Indo-Hyas to the Ambulocetus, which had an average size of around 12 feet in length and often weighed over 600 pounds. The evolution from the Indo-Hyas to the Ambulocetus is an example of sympatric speciation, as the two species lived in the same area of the world, Pakistan, and the Ambulocetus evolved from the Indo-Hyas, effectively taking its place. Although the Ambulocetus looks far more like the killer whale than the Indo-Hyas, it still doesn't really look like the killer whale, given it has fur and limbs, although several of its biological traits suggest that it is a very early ancestor of the killer whale and all whales for that matter. Some traits in the Ambulocetus that suggest that it is beginning to evolve into an animal that has a primarily aquatic lifestyle, to eventually fully aquatic lifestyle, are things like its loss of the external ear, the lengthening of the Ambulocetus's head, transitioning towards a connected body and head we see in whales today. The Ambulocetus also has a far longer and more mobile tail than its ancestor, and far less maneuverable limbs on land. The Ambulocetus's limbs still played a large part in its swimming, although running on land was likely difficult for these mammals, given the size and strength of their limbs combined with their large and heavy body. The Rhodhocetus, living around 45 million years ago, was the first ancestor of the killer whale that likely lived an entirely aquatic lifestyle. The Rhodhocetus did have biological traits like 4 limbs, hands, and feet to make moving on land possible, but it is extremely unlikely that they went on land, as it would have been very difficult to move, which would make them extremely vulnerable to other animals. The Rhodhocetus was similar to the Ambulocetus in many ways, like their diet, habitat, and size, but there are a few differences between the animals other than age that make it clear the Rhodhocetus is a closer relative to the killer whale and further down the evolutionary track than the Ambulocetus. For example, the Ambulocetus did have webbed hands and feet, although their limbs were far larger than the Rhodhocetus's. In fact, half of the Rhodhocetus's limbs are their webbed hands and feet, which is slowly evolving into fins. The Rhodhocetus also primarily swam with its tail, and its hands and feet acted more as steering mechanisms. Their nostrils also moved closer to the top of their head to aid in breathing underwater. The Rhodhocetus had many biological and physical traits that are similar to today's mammals, and they are classified as such. The Rhodhocetus's full taxonomy is Kingdom Animalia, Phylum Chordata, Class Mammalia, Order Artiodactyla, Family Protocetidae, Genus Protocetidae, and Species Rhodhocetus. It is no wonder why the Rhodhocetus has so many similar traits to mammals today, given that they share the same taxonomy from their kingdom, to their order as many modern-day animals, even though they lived 45 million years ago. The evolutionary gap between the Rhodocetus and the Durodon is certainly the largest difference out of all the ancestors of the killer whale that I chose for this project. Not only is the animal more than double in length and increased significantly in weight, with the average Durodon weighing in at about 1,200 pounds and being about 5 meters long, the Durodon is the first ancestor of the killer whale who certainly lived an aquatic lifestyle, living around 41 million years ago. The biogeography of the ancestors of the killer whale have been moving towards an aquatic lifestyle, although before the Durodon, the killer whale's ancestors lived a semi-aquatic lifestyle. Given the proportions of the Ambulocetus and the Rhodocetus, it is likely they spent the majority of their time in the water, although they did likely go on land. The Durodon, however, did not have this ability. Given the size of the Durodon's jaw, they likely had the same diet of the Ambulocetus, with the addition of sharks and other larger animals that the Rhodocetus couldn't get its jaws on. The main trait that suggests the Durodon is further along down the evolutionary path towards the killer whale than the Rhodocetus is the highly evolved underwater hearing, which is an early hint towards the evolutionary development of echolocation. Echolocation is a major part of the killer whale's hunting tactics and aids in locating prey, which they then hunt. The Mysicetus, living around 35 to 5 million years ago, is a baleen whale. So unlike the killer whale's previous ancestors, they don't eat sharks or larger fish, and their diet consists of mostly krill, plankton, and small fish that they eat thousands of pounds of every day in order to maintain their size or even grow. The Mysicetus grew up to 30 meters in length and can weigh up to 300,000 pounds. Despite being a baleen whale, the Mysicetus is the ancestor to all whales, including toothed whales like the killer whale. The Mysicetus had a blowhole and spent a lot of their time in deep waters, hundreds of meters below the surface. The Mysicetus did not have any natural predators once they were fully grown and lived a long life, up to 90 years. And given the fact that they lived so long, females could reproduce every few years to make the Mysicetus a very successful species in terms of natural selection, and only completely died out about 5 million years ago due to the earth and water temperatures dropping. The Mysicetus shows signs of evolution from land mammals through its vestigial structures. For example, the Mysicetus still had both a pelvis and femur bone, which are essential parts of the leg that allows land animals to walk, but no longer serves a purpose to the Mysicetus as they are fully aquatic animals. The fundamental theory of evolution is natural selection. This is not the same as survival of the fittest, as that is when the strongest, smartest, or fastest animal survives. Natural selection is where the species who are most compatible to their environment will thrive, while species who don't fit in well with their environment won't find food as easily or won't produce as much, which will eventually lead to that species experiencing a decline in population or even becoming extinct. An example of this is if there are two types of bunnies that are the exact same in every way except for that one's fur is brown and one's fur is white. The brown fur bunny will thrive in the forest when there is no snow, as they will blend into their environment better, and predators will not find them as easily. But when the snow falls, the white bunny will be more successful. This has nothing to do with the bunny's intelligence or strength. It is based on which species of bunny their environment selects for. Speciation is when a new species is formed, in which an ancestral species splits into multiple different species, each with their own unique characteristics. In conclusion, the orca whale has a very complex evolutionary history that spans over tens of millions of years. Over this extremely long period of time, the orca whale's history started as a land mammal that ate plants and weighed no more than 30 pounds and ended up with a dominant predator of the sea weighing up to 12,000 pounds. The ancestors of the orca whale continued to grow and became higher and higher in their respective food chains until eventually we got to the orca whale, an animal that is very difficult to imagine ever becoming extinct.